A free couch, a babysitting gig, a late-night ride. All innocent Craigslist ads. Until the moment you realize you were the item being sold. Tonight, DreadScribe writes again. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling stories. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing where everyone is tuning in from. And if there's a story you'd like me to cover next, I'd love to hear it too. The ad seemed harmless enough. Free couch, gently used. First come, first served. In a city where furniture prices felt like ransom notes, the word free glowed like a lighthouse in the fog. I could already picture it in my apartment. Soft cushions, a perfect place to crash after work, maybe even a space where friends would gather. It felt like a small stroke of luck in a year that had been anything but lucky. I didn't pause to consider why someone would give away something so valuable. Sometimes when life hands you a gift, you just take it. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The house was on the outskirts of town, past a stretch of road where streetlights flickered like dying fireflies. When I pulled up, the first thing I noticed was how silent it was. No barking dogs, no distant hum of traffic, just an oppressive stillness that pressed against my skin. The porch light glowed a weak yellow, barely cutting through the mist that seemed to seep from the trees. The front door was already ajar, as though someone had been expecting me. My gut twisted, but my logic overrode it. People leave doors open all the time, right? Inside, the air was damp and heavy, carrying the scent of mildew and something metallic beneath it. The living room was dimly lit by a single lamp, its shade tilted as if it had been knocked over and never fixed. And there it was, the couch. It was beautiful in its own way, a vintage piece with curved wooden arms and deep burgundy fabric. But a dark stain spread across one of the cushions like a shadow frozen mid-motion. My first thought was spilled wine. My second was blood. I swallowed hard and forced a smile as a man stepped out from the hallway. He was tall and thin, his clothes hanging off him as though they'd been borrowed. His smile stretched too wide, never touching the cold, pale eyes that studied me with unsettling precision. "You must be here for the couch," he said warmly, though the tone felt rehearsed like a recording played on loop. I nodded, my voice catching as I tried to thank him. Something about the way he tilted his head, just a fraction too far, made my skin crawl. As I stepped closer to examine the couch, my shoe brushed against something on the carpet. A thin piece of twine, frayed at the ends, lay coiled like a snake. My mind raced with possibilities I didn't want to consider. The man stood behind me now, close enough that I could feel his breath on my neck. "It's sturdy," he murmured. "Built to last." His words sent a shiver through me, as though he weren't talking about furniture at all. I told myself to grab the couch quickly and leave, but when I turned toward the door, I heard it, a soft click. The unmistakable sound of a lock sliding into place. My stomach dropped. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls inching closer like a trap. The man's smile widened as he stepped between me and the exit. That's when I realized the ad wasn't offering me a free couch at all. It was offering me. He moved first, slow and deliberate, as if closing a book he'd memorized. I edged toward the couch, pretending to admire the woodwork while mapping exits the way a field biologist sketches a habitat. 2 windows were painted shut, seams thick as scars. One lamp wobbled on a frayed cord. From the hallway drifted the sharp burn of bleach. Fear didn't blur me. It honed me. Under threat, attention funnels. And mine narrowed until only 3 points remained. The man, the locked door, and the stained cushion that seemed to darken as it watched me back. I needed leverage, or a lie, or both. "I can pay," I said, ironing the tremor from my voice. "Free is kind, but I brought cash." His head tilted in that unsettling arc, like a raven puzzling over foil. The smile stayed, but his eyes didn't blink. I hated how his gaze tracked the swallow in my throat, counting. Predator's clock breath and hesitation. He stepped closer, testing the flock animal in me. My heart battered its cage like a moth in a jar. What he didn't expect was how fast a script can crack when you hand it a new line. "Help me carry one end?" I pointed to the heavier side. He weighed control against convenience and nodded. His fingers were pale and nicked, a biography written by cheap knives. We lifted. The couch groaned with a hollow clink as if a toolbox were buried in its ribs. My hand found a seam beneath the cushion, restitched in a different thread, sloppy and urgent, like a wound closed in panic. A generous stranger might hide money, A careful one hides tools. A careful one plans for return trips. When he bent to resettle his grip, I bumped the lamp with my hip. It toppled and burst, glass skittering like thrown ice. Night poured across the room, thick and grainy. He hissed, and in that pocket of sound I slid the cushion free. Inside the foam, a crude pocket held duct tape, a box cutter, and a phone with a spidered screen. The tape felt warm, as if it remembered wrists. The phone woke to a lock screen photo. A woman at a lake, wind flaring her hair, joy bright as a struck match. No service, no out, he lunged. I shoved the cushion into him. It slapped the stain and fell face down like a closing eyelid, and the smell rose, copper and old rain. I raked the box cutter along a window seam. The blade squealed. Paint flaked like dry bark. The sash held fast. He caught my hood and yanked. The world snapped backward. Panic is messy, but strategy can ride it like a hidden rider. I twisted free, leaving my sweatshirt in his fist, a shed skin, and sprinted for the bleach-scented hall. The house creaking like a throat that didn't want to speak. Doors lined the corridor, some yawning, some sealed like held breath. At the end waited a half-closed one. Inside, a dehumidifier hummed. A chest freezer wore frost like fur. My reflection shivered in the metal lid. I lifted it. Plastic-wrapped bundles sagged like sleeping seals. Pressed beneath the rime, a driver's license stared up, the lake woman's fogged photo unmistakable. The rational part of my brain began cataloging, labeling, pleading for procedure, the way a lighthouse pleads with fog. A floorboard behind me sighed. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said, voice low, almost tender, a lullaby with its teeth showing. Deeper in the house, something knocked once, then twice, as if answering a question I hadn't dared to ask. The sound traveled through the walls like a pulse hunting for a vein. I tightened my grip on the box cutter, and the room orbited the small, cold planet of its blade. Cold bit my fingers. Winter air breathed out of it. The ad felt like a lifeline. Babysitter needed tonight. Good pay. Quiet location. It was buried halfway down the Craigslist page, just a few blunt words against a white background. My bank account was suffocating, rent looming like a storm cloud, and this seemed like a quick fix. The address was in an upscale neighborhood I'd only driven through before, where the houses looked like museum exhibits rather than homes. I told myself it would be easy money, a night of cartoons, juice boxes, and maybe a sleeping kid while I scrolled my phone. Simple, harmless. When I arrived, the house glowed like a perfect photograph. The exterior lights cast a soft golden hue over manicured hedges, and the porch smelled faintly of lavender. But there was no sound, no hum of a television, no laughter, no barking dog. It was too still, like a stage set frozen between acts. A woman opened the door before I could knock. She was striking, her smile polite yet oddly hollow, like it had been practiced for a mirror rather than another human being. Her eyes swept over me with a precision that felt clinical. The boy I was hired to watch appeared at her side. He was maybe 7 or 8, dressed neatly in pajamas, but his expression was vacant. Children usually brim with curiosity, their energy spilling into every room. But he didn't speak, didn't fidget, didn't even glance at me. He just stood there, hands at his sides, eyes fixed somewhere slightly behind me. A chill slid down my spine. The parents left quickly, almost too quickly, as though eager to get away. I tried to break the silence by asking the boy if he wanted a snack or to watch a movie, but he only nodded once mechanically. His small frame looked fragile beneath the glow of the kitchen lights, yet there was something unnervingly adult in the way he moved, deliberate and controlled. As the evening wore on, I tried to settle in. The house was pristine, each object perfectly aligned as if measured with a ruler. Even the air felt sterile, devoid of the comforting chaos that usually comes with children. It was while fetching a blanket from the hall closet that I noticed the first note. It was lying on the floor, folded neatly, with my name scrawled across it in a familiar looping script. When I opened it, my breath caught. The words inside were written in my handwriting. Do not trust him. The paper trembled between my fingers as my mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe the mother had copied my handwriting from the sign-in sheet. Maybe this was some twisted prank. But deep down, a primal fear whispered that this was no coincidence. I shoved the note into my pocket and returned to the living room. The boy was sitting cross-legged on the rug, staring at the wall. For the first time, he smiled. Another note, tucked beneath the couch cushion, edges just visible. This one read, "You are not here to protect him. You are here to be tested." Before I could react, the boy slowly turned his head toward me. In the silence, his soft, steady whisper filled the room. "They're watching." The whisper threaded through me like an electric current, thin but searing. I stared at him, trying to read any trace of mischief in his expression. But the boy's face was a mask, smooth, pale, and unreadable. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, dark as spilled ink, and every reflection of my own body looked slightly wrong, like a portrait painted from memory rather than life. The house no longer felt pristine. It felt staged, like a laboratory disguised as a home. My pulse quickened, a bird beating against glass. I crouched beside him and asked who was watching, but his gaze shifted past me toward the hallway. Without a word, he lifted a trembling hand and pointed. My stomach knotted. At the end of the hall hung a mirror I hadn't noticed before, tall and gilt-framed, its surface dimly fogged as if someone had just breathed on it. A new note clung to its edge, stark white against the gold. I approached slowly, the air growing cooler with each step, my footsteps swallowed by the carpet. The note read, "Time to decide." The letters were my own, loops and flourishes unmistakable, but written with a steadier hand than I could manage now. I looked back at the boy. He was no longer sitting but standing rigidly, his arms at his sides, eyes locked on me with a weight far older than his years. Behind him, the television flickered on by itself, showing only static. Each hiss and pop of white noise felt like a countdown, a coded warning I couldn't translate. My breath came in shallow pulls. Had they been studying me? Recording me? The thought of cameras hidden in the walls made my skin prickle. Another note fluttered to the floor from somewhere unseen. I picked it up with shaking fingers. "The child is not the test. You are." My vision swam. The house tilted. It wasn't just a job. It was a maze designed to measure my instincts, my fear, my willingness to protect. But protect from what? Or from whom? When I turned again, the boy had moved closer, so close I could see the tiny constellation of freckles on his cheek. His voice was calm but carried an echo, as if two voices overlapped. "They want to know which side you'll choose." The sentence clung to me like wet cloth. Somewhere beyond the walls, faint footsteps circled, soft and deliberate, like predators pacing a cage. On the coffee table lay a final note, sealed with a smear of something dark. My hands hesitated, then tore it open. "Escape now and you'll never be found. Stay and you'll become family." My heart hammered against my ribs, desperate to break free, yet a strange pull rooted me to the floor. The boy reached out a small hand, palm up, eyes shining with an uncanny light. The static on the television deepened into a low hum that vibrated through the floorboards. The front door creaked open on its own, spilling a wedge of cold night air across the carpet. Two paths waited, one toward the door and the other toward the boy's outstretched hand. My choice would decide who I truly was, but whose game had I been playing all along? The Craigslist ad was blunt, almost aggressively so. Room for rent, cheap, no questions asked. In a city where rent felt like a cruel joke, it was the only option standing between me and sleeping in my car. I told myself it was temporary, just a stepping stone until life steadied again. Still, there was something unsettling about the wording, especially the part about no questions asked. It sounded less like an invitation and more like a warning. The house sat at the end of a lonely street, where cracked sidewalks disappeared into overgrown weeds. Its paint peeled like sunburned skin, and the windows glimmered faintly, reflecting a gray sky heavy with rain. A man was waiting on the porch. He looked ordinary enough at first glance, but his smile was thin and precise, the kind you practice alone in the mirror. He introduced himself as Mr. Halverson, the landlord. His rules were simple: cash only, no guests, and under no circumstances was I to open the basement door. He repeated that last part twice, his voice sharpening on the second pass like a blade being honed. I laughed nervously, thinking it was some eccentric quirk, but his face didn't change. Something in his eyes held me still, a glint that suggested this was more than a house rule. Against my better judgment, I nodded and agreed. The room itself was better than I'd expected. Small but clean, with a single window overlooking a sagging fence. By nightfall, I was almost relieved to have a roof over my head. Almost. Because that's when I first heard it, a muffled sound beneath the floorboards. At first, I dismissed it as plumbing or old wood settling. But as the hours passed, the noise grew clearer, forming a rhythm too deliberate to be random. It wasn't the creak of a house. It was a voice. A low, anguished cry, like someone begging through a mouthful of water. I pressed my ear to the floor, heart thundering. There it was again, unmistakable now. Words, broken and frantic, too distorted to understand. I jerked back, telling myself I'd imagined it, but the sound kept coming. Louder, closer. Sleep became impossible. Over the next 2 nights, the cries escalated. Sometimes it sounded like more than one voice, overlapping in a discordant harmony that made my skin crawl. I tried confronting Mr. Halverson, but he cut me off with a stare so cold it felt like stepping into a walk-in freezer. "The basement is off limits," he said, each word dropping like a stone into dark water. But curiosity is a living thing, and mine was starving. By the 4th night, I couldn't take it anymore. When the clock struck 3 a.m., I crept from my room, every step careful, measured. The house seemed to hold its breath with me. The basement door waited at the end of the hall, its paint chipped, its brass knob dull with age. My hand trembled as I reached for it. The cries below had grown frantic, almost pleading. I turned the knob. It opened with a sigh, releasing a rush of cold, damp air that smelled of rust and rot. And then, from the darkness below, came a single word. Clear, desperate, and undeniably human. "Run." The word struck me like a physical blow. My first instinct was to slam the door shut and pretend none of this was real. But some deeper primal part of me wouldn't allow it. My feet moved on their own, carrying me down the creaking wooden steps. The air grew colder with every descent, thick and metallic, like breathing through a mouthful of pennies. The basement was far larger than the house should have allowed. A single naked bulb swung from the ceiling, casting frantic shadows that danced across the concrete walls. Along one side, a series of cages lined the room, rusted bars streaked with something dark. Inside the nearest cage sat a figure, a woman, her face pale and sunken, eyes wide with terror. She clutched the bars as if they were the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. "Please," she rasped, her voice shredded from screaming. "You have to get us out before he comes back." Us. My gaze darted to the other cages and my stomach lurched. There were more people. A man with blood-matted hair, a child no older than 10, an elderly woman rocking back and forth muttering to herself. Their collective desperation pressed against me like a wave, stealing my breath. I stumbled back, horrified, my mind racing. Mr. Halverson hadn't been guarding an empty basement. He'd been keeping them. But why? The woman's hands shot through the bars, grabbing my wrist. "He feeds off choices," she whispered fiercely. "He makes us choose. Who suffers, who lives. That's why he needs outsiders like you." Her words tangled in my brain, too monstrous to process. Then a sound drifted down from above, the slow, deliberate creak of a floorboard. My blood froze. Someone was moving upstairs. Panic clawed at me. I searched for anything that could open the cages, finally spotting a ring of keys hanging on a nail near the stairs. I snatched them, my hands slick with sweat, and fumbled to unlock the first door. The lock clicked open, and the woman staggered out, sobbing. But before I could free the others, the basement door slammed shut. Heavy footsteps descended the stairs with a dreadful calmness, like a predator savoring the hunt. Mr. Halverson emerged from the shadows, his thin smile stretched too wide. "You couldn't follow one simple rule," he murmured. "Curiosity is such a beautiful flaw." I backed away, clutching the keys like a weapon. Behind me, the freed woman screamed for me to run. Halverson's eyes glittered, almost inhuman. "Now you have to choose," he said, voice thick with something that wasn't quite human hunger. The floorboards above us groaned again, but this time it wasn't just footsteps. It was a chorus, many feet, many voices, descending slowly, chanting words I couldn't understand. I bolted for the stairs, heart hammering, but as I reached the top, the door burst open. Standing there wasn't Halverson, but a crowd of strangers with vacant, glassy eyes. And every single one of them was smiling the same thin, precise smile he wore. Behind me, the captives wailed. Ahead of me, The smiling crowd reached out their hands in perfect unison, and I realized with a sickening certainty that the basement hadn't been with objects that hold stories, pieces of the past trapped in brass and glass. That's why the Craigslist listing caught my eye. Vintage camera, early 1900s, excellent condition, rare find. The grainy photo showed a boxy black body with intricate silver etching, the kind of craftsmanship you don't see anymore. It wasn't just a camera. It was a relic, a time capsule. I imagined the hands that once held it, the moments it had witnessed. For a mere $50, it felt like destiny. The man who sold it to me barely spoke. His apartment smelled faintly of dust and burnt coffee, and he seemed eager to hand over the camera, like it carried a weight he couldn't wait to be rid of. His eyes lingered on me as I left, though, sharp and calculating, as if memorizing my face. At the time, I brushed it off as paranoia. When I first held the camera in my own living room, I felt a strange hum beneath my fingertips, like static before a storm. The lens gleamed despite its age, and the tiny winding gears clicked with a satisfying precision. It felt alive. That night, I loaded it with a roll of film I'd bought for fun, excited to test it out. The first photos I took were harmless. My coffee mug on the table, a stack of books, the soft glow of my lamp. But when I developed the film at a local shop, my stomach tightened. In each image, faint shapes appeared in the background. At first, they were blurry, almost like smudges. But with each frame, they grew sharper. Figures, human figures. One photo of my bookshelf revealed a tall, shadowed shape crouching near the corner, its limbs wrong, too long. Another, of my kitchen counter, showed a pale face peering from behind the doorway. A face that hadn't been there when I snapped the picture. The final photo was the worst. My own silhouette, standing in the center of my living room, even though I'd been alone when I took it. I convinced myself it was some photographic artifact, a quirk of old lenses. But deep down, a cold knot of dread tightened in my gut. The next night, I set up the camera again, determined to disprove my fear. I photographed my empty hallway, my locked front door, even the dark window panes. But when I developed the second roll, the figures were closer, too close. One image showed a hand, thin and skeletal, reaching toward my shoulder. Sleep became impossible. I felt watched, every creak of the floorboards like a breath behind me. I finally shoved the camera into a drawer, vowing never to touch it again. But the next morning, a notification lit up my phone. A new Craigslist ad for a vintage camera. The same model, the same description. And the seller's name? It wasn't just similar to mine, it was mine. At first, I thought it was a glitch, some algorithm pulling my name from saved searches. But the longer I stared at that listing, the more my skin prickled. The description wasn't just identical. It was word for word, down to the way the seller described the etching on the lens. The location was listed as my neighborhood. And the photo? It was my living room table. The same grain of wood, the same lamp in the background. My stomach flipped like a coin. Someone had my camera, or they were inside my house. I ran to the drawer where I'd shoved it. The camera sat there, motionless, but something had changed. The brass edges were warm to the touch, almost feverish. My reflection in the lens looked slightly delayed, like a live feed with a lag. That small glitch fractured my denial. This wasn't a quirk of film or an overactive imagination. Something had attached itself to the camera. A mechanism older than photography, but coded into it like a hidden signature. I unrolled the last strip of developed negatives, holding it to the light. Each frame felt like a confession whispered through time. In the penultimate image, the skeletal hand now rested fully on my shoulder. And in the final frame, I was no longer in my living room at all, but in some dark, indistinct place. My back turned, head bowed, a blurred crowd behind me. Seeing myself in a space I'd never stood in was like glimpsing my own obituary. Sleep-deprived logic told me to destroy the camera. But another part of me, the same reckless curiosity that had drawn me to it, wanted answers. So I set it on my table, loaded a fresh roll, and aimed it at the mirror across the room. My fingers trembled as I pressed the shutter. The sound was softer than before, almost a sigh. When I developed that roll in my bathroom under the dim red light, the first few images were of my reflection, just as expected. But halfway through, my reflection shifted. I was no longer holding the camera. Someone else was. A figure with my height, my hair, but not my eyes. Its gaze burned through the grainy photo, cold and patient. The last frame stopped my breath. It was my living room again, but the angle was from the corner near the ceiling, as if someone perched there had taken it. I was asleep on the couch, mouth slightly open, unaware. The timestamp in the corner read 3:07 a.m., the same time I'd been dreaming of hands brushing my hair. That night I stayed awake until dawn, every creak and whisper amplified. When I finally checked Craigslist again, the ad had changed. The headline no longer read vintage camera for sale. It read, "Pick up tonight, payment already taken." Underneath was a single photo, me standing at my own front door, my hand on the knob, looking back. The listing didn't have a contact button anymore. It only had one line of text. "You're next on the list." When I saw the ad for a weekend pet sitting job, it felt like found money. 2 nights, minimal work, $400 cash. The listing was vague, but desperation doesn't leave room for questions. College loans were circling like vultures, and this gig promised to be easy. Feed the dog, keep the house tidy, and lock up before the owners returned. That was it. The family's home sat at the edge of town, where the streetlights thinned and the trees leaned in too close, their branches knitting together like skeletal fingers. The house itself was beautiful, but unsettling. A Victorian structure with gabled windows that seemed to watch me approach. The couple greeted me warmly, though their smiles felt stretched, fragile at the edges. They handed me a written list of instructions and emphasized one rule more than the rest. Under no circumstances open the basement door. I laughed nervously, assuming it was to keep the dog contained. The husband didn't laugh back. His voice dropped an octave as he repeated, "No matter what you hear, do not open it." His wife wouldn't meet my eyes. A strange current passed between them, unspoken but heavy, like a storm forming just beyond the horizon. After they left, the house settled into an eerie stillness. It smelled faintly of cedar and something metallic beneath it, sharp and sour, like rusting nails. I unpacked my overnight bag, trying to shake off the unease. For the first few hours, everything was perfectly normal. I wandered the rooms, admired the antique furniture, and scrolled on my phone. Then I heard it. A low, guttural growl from beneath the floorboards. It didn't sound like any dog I'd ever heard. It was deeper, wetter, almost vibrating with rage. The sound coiled through the house like smoke, setting every nerve on edge. My heart thudded as I crept toward the basement door. A single heavy lock secured it, the metal cold against my fingertips. Something slammed against the other side, hard enough to rattle the hinges. I stumbled back, breath shallow. The instructions had been explicit. Feed it twice a day by sliding the bowl through a slot at the bottom of the door. I followed the steps exactly, hands trembling as I pushed a bowl of meat beneath the narrow opening. Whatever was down there lunged at the food, snarling, its claws scraping the wood with a screech that made my teeth ache. The first night was sleepless. The growls continued for hours, broken by a strange rhythmic thumping, like fists pounding in some twisted pattern. When dawn finally bled gray through the windows, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Long, deep gouges etched into the hallway walls near the basement door. They hadn't been there the night before. By the second evening, new marks appeared, higher up, almost near the ceiling. The instructions now felt less like guidelines and more like a threat, and the growls had changed. They sounded deliberate, like something learning to speak. As darkness fell, a single chilling realization rooted in my mind. I wasn't keeping it locked away for safety. By the third night, the house felt like a living organism, its floorboards pulsing faintly beneath my feet as if some hidden heart was beating below. The written instructions lay crumpled on the kitchen counter, the ink smudged from my sweaty hands. I read them again and again, hoping some overlooked line would explain why the walls now bore claw marks in fresh splinters, high above my head like a warning carved by something that had learned to stand. I set the bowl of meat near the basement slot, but this time the scraping didn't come. Silence radiated from the door, heavy and deliberate, as though the creature knew I was waiting. That silence was worse than the growls. It pressed against my eardrums, a vacuum that seemed to suck the warmth from the air. My reflection in the hall mirror looked gaunt and ghostly, eyes wide and hollow, like a sleepwalker glimpsing themselves mid-dream. I backed away and locked myself in the guest bedroom, counting the hours until dawn. But at exactly 3 a.m., a new sound began. Not claws, not growls, but a soft scratching, like a pencil across paper. It came from under the door. I forced myself to look. A scrap of lined notebook paper slid slowly into the room. My name was written on it in careful blocky letters. Beneath it, not a dog. Every hair on my body rose. The note smelled faintly of iron, as though the ink were something other than ink. I crawled to the door, heart hammering, and pressed my ear against the wood. A voice whispered from the other side, low and deliberate, the syllables broken but clear. "Open, please." It was almost childlike, almost human. I thought of the couple's brittle smiles, of their refusal to meet my eyes. Had they locked a person down there? Was I feeding some imprisoned soul? My stomach clenched with guilt and fear. I grabbed the keys from the hook near the pantry, my hands shaking so badly they jingled like chimes in a storm. When I reached the basement door, my fingers hesitated on the lock. One turn and I could end this, free whatever was inside. But something primal screamed at me to stop. In that moment, I noticed the smell again, stronger now, not just metallic but sweet and rotten, like fruit left to liquefy in the sun. It seeped from under the door, curling around my ankles like a living mist. I turned the key anyway. The lock clicked. The door swung inward with a moan, revealing nothing but blackness so dense it looked solid. A rush of cold air slammed into me, carrying a sound that wasn't quite a growl and wasn't quite a laugh. Then, from deep inside, a pair of eyes opened, too wide, too high off the ground, glinting like wet glass. Behind me, the front door clicked shut on its own, and from the kitchen, a voice I hadn't heard before whispered with quiet satisfaction, "Perfect bait." The ad was polished and professional, almost too perfect for Craigslist. Seeking driven individual for an exclusive high-paying position. Discretion required. Life-changing opportunity. It read like a dream come true, and I was desperate enough to believe it. My bills were suffocating me, each overdue notice a fresh noose tightening around my neck. I convinced myself this was my chance to claw my way back into stability. The address they sent me was in a part of the city where old bank buildings had been gutted and repurposed into trendy offices. When I arrived, the streets were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made your own footsteps sound accusatory. The building itself loomed like a mausoleum, its stone facade streaked with years of rain. I expected to find a receptionist, maybe a waiting area bustling with other hopeful applicants. Instead, the lobby was empty. Inside, the space was stripped bare. No furniture, no art, just echoing white walls and a single long table beneath flickering fluorescent lights. My shoes clicked loudly on the polished concrete as I approached. A man sat at the table, perfectly still, dressed in a crisp black suit that looked almost too tailored, as though it had been stitched directly onto his skin. He smiled when I sat down, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes, a mathematical expression of politeness rather than warmth. The interview began normally enough. He asked about my background, my goals, my strengths. But soon the question shifted. Subtle at first. Did I live alone? Who would notice if I disappeared for a few days? Did I have regrets I would trade anything to erase? Each question peeled another layer off my defenses. His voice was smooth, hypnotic, and the room seemed to shrink around us. Sweat pooled at the base of my spine, but I kept answering, my words tumbling out like coins dropped into a slot machine. Finally, he slid a sheet of paper across the table. The contract. My pulse quickened. The text wasn't printed in black ink, but a deep, unsettling crimson that seemed to shimmer wetly under the harsh lights. The clauses were vague yet chilling. All rights, physical and metaphysical, are hereby transferred. At the bottom was a space for my signature. I laughed nervously, thinking it was some bizarre legal jargon, but his gaze remained fixed, unblinking. "Sign," he said softly, and there was no room for refusal in that single word. As my hand hovered over the pen, I noticed something strange in the reflection of the table's glossy surface. My mirrored self wasn't mimicking me. Its hand twitched upward, fingers splayed wide, as if reaching for something just beyond the glass. Terror surged through me. I shoved the paper back and bolted, my footsteps echoing like gunshots. Behind me, the man didn't chase, but I could hear his voice following, calm and almost amused. "You can run," he said, "but the offer still stands." When I burst through the glass doors into the daylight, I risked a glance at my reflection. It didn't move, or a heartbeat. I froze, my lungs locked as if the air had turned to glass inside me. My reflection stared back, but it wasn't me. Its chest didn't heave with panic. Its lips didn't tremble with fear. It simply watched, still and patient, like a predator crouched behind a window. The longer I stared, the more wrong it felt. The angles of my face slightly off, my eyes too dark, like a copy of a photograph that had been distorted through endless reprints. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the curb, desperate to put distance between myself and the building. People passed me on the street, but none of them seemed to notice anything strange. To them, I was just another frantic stranger in a city full of ghosts. When I dared another glance at the glass door, my reflection was still there, unmoving. Then, impossibly, it smiled. My body went cold. I ran. Blocks blurred together as my feet pounded the pavement, my thoughts splintering into frantic shards. I didn't stop until I ducked into a crowded coffee shop, my hands shaking so violently I spilled water down my shirt. In the bathroom, I stared into the mirror above the sink, praying to see my own movements mirrored back. For a moment, relief flooded me. My reflection moved in perfect sync, but then I saw it. A faint red smear on my collarbone shaped like a fingerprint. It wasn't mine. Memories of the interview rushed back, fragments clicking into place like a cruel puzzle. The questions hadn't been about a job. They'd been measuring me, cataloging me. The contract hadn't been a metaphorical agreement. It had been literal, a transaction of identity, of essence. And I'd been moments away from signing it away. I splashed water on my face, trying to think. When I looked up again, my reflection was no longer alone. Behind me in the mirror's depths stood the man in the black suit. His hand rested lightly on my shoulder, though the bathroom around me was empty. His lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. I spun around. Nothing, just the echo of my ragged breathing. But when I turned back, the mirror had changed. It no longer reflected the bathroom at all. Instead, it showed the empty white room from the interview, the table waiting, the crimson contract laid out neatly. And sitting in the chair across from it was me. My mirrored self lifted the pen with a slow, deliberate grace. My scream tore from my throat as I slammed my fist into the glass. The mirror shattered, shards raining down like falling stars, but the image didn't break. The final thing I saw before the pieces went dark was my other self signing the contract, its smile stretching wide. When I staggered back into the coffee shop, everyone stared at me like I was a stranger. Their eyes slid past me, unrecognizing, as if I were already gone, and in the reflection of the shop's window, it was walking away in my body, while I remained trapped on the wrong side of the glass. The word free is a siren song you can't ignore. I found the ad late one night, bleary-eyed and half delirious from scrolling Craigslist for cheap gear. Free upright piano, needs a good home, must pick up tonight. My tiny apartment had been begging for one, but I'd never been able to afford it. This felt like a gift from the universe, a chance to finally write the songs I'd been carrying in my head for years. The man who gave it to me was strange, though not in any obvious way. His house was nearly empty, bare walls and shadowy corners that looked like they were trying to hide something. He barely spoke as we loaded the heavy piano onto the dolly, his hands trembling whenever they brushed the keys. When I thanked him, he just muttered, "Play it often, or it'll play you." I laughed awkwardly, thinking it was just an odd joke, but he didn't smile. By the time I got the piano into my apartment, exhaustion drowned my unease. The instrument was beautiful up close, its mahogany surface etched with delicate vines and flowers, though the carvings seemed almost too intricate, like veins spreading through wood. My fingers itched to play, but it was past midnight and my neighbors were unforgiving. I promised myself I'd explore its voice in the morning. Sleep came easily at first. Then, sometime around 3 a.m., I woke to music. Soft, lilting notes floated through the darkness, weaving a melody so mournful it felt like the air itself was grieving. I stumbled to the living room, heart pounding. The piano sat in the moonlight, its lid closed, its keys perfectly still. The sound faded as I approached, like a dream dissolving at dawn. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been my imagination. Stress can make you hear things, Phantom phone vibrations, whispers in the white noise of a fan. I played the piano for hours, and its tone was rich and warm, like liquid amber. It felt alive beneath my hands, each chord blooming with strange emotion. For a while I forgot the night entirely, but the second night was different. The melody returned, louder this time, seeping under my bedroom door like a slow tide. It wasn't mournful anymore. It was urgent, almost angry. I crept into the living room, and for a split second, I swore I saw the keys moving on their own, pressed by invisible hands. My breath caught, then silence. On the third night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the dark watching. At exactly 3 a.m., the first note rang out, a single trembling tone that seemed to pierce straight into my bones. The keys moved again, deliberate and precise, playing a melody I didn't recognize. My body was frozen, trapped between terror and awe. When the song ended, something small slipped from beneath the piano's lid and fluttered to the floor. A yellowed piece of paper. My shaking hands unfolded it, revealing a message scrawled in frantic, uneven letters. If you're reading this, the piano has chosen you. The words blurred as my hands trembled, the paper smelling faintly of dust and something darker, like burnt sugar. Beneath the first line was a longer passage, the handwriting jagged, frantic. It plays because it hungers. Every note feeds it. Grief, rage, fear. I thought I could control it, but the songs became mine. Then they became me. When you hear it play alone, it isn't practicing. It's calling. Leave now, or it will learn the sound of your soul. My chest tightened. I glanced at the piano, its carved vines seeming deeper than before, almost writhing in the half-light. A low, discordant note thrummed from its belly, so faint I might have imagined it. But the floorboards vibrated beneath my feet. The message wasn't some prank. It was a warning, one I was already too late to heed. I stuffed the note into my pocket and backed toward the door, intending to flee. Then a sound rose from the piano, sharp and commanding. 3 notes, struck hard and fast. My muscles locked. I couldn't move. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the very room were inhaling. Slowly, against my will, I turned back toward the instrument. The lid creaked open like the mouth of some ancient creature. The melody began again, no longer haunting but furious. It surged through the apartment, notes colliding like waves in a storm. Shadows thickened in the corners, pulsing in rhythm with the song. My vision blurred. I saw memories that weren't mine. A man sobbing as he played, his hands bleeding on the keys. A woman laughing while her reflection in the piano's glossy surface screamed silently. I realized then that the piano didn't just play music. It recorded emotion, trapping the pain and joy of everyone who touched it, layering those feelings into its songs until they became unbearable. And now, it was reaching for me. Desperate, I lunged forward and slammed the lid shut. The sound cut off instantly, leaving a vacuum of silence so sharp my ears rang. Panting, I ripped the sheet music from the stand, scattering it across the room like dead leaves. I had to destroy it, burn it, smash it, anything to end this. But as I reached for the phone to call for help, a fresh melody rose. Soft, almost tender. It came not from the piano, but from behind me. Slowly I turned. The apartment's mirrors reflected me, and another figure standing beside me, fingers hovering over invisible keys. Its face was blurred, unfinished, like a sketch abandoned mid-stroke. The music grew louder, filling the space between us, until my teeth ached. In the final moment of clarity, I understood what the note had meant by chosen. The piano hadn't been gifted to me. It had been passed on, like a curse searching for its next voice, and as the figure's hands descended, pressing notes only it could see, the real piano began to play again, this time in perfect harmony with my own racing heartbeat. My car broke down just after midnight, halfway between 2 rural exits where the only light came from flickering billboards and the faint glow of a gas station miles behind me. The air smelled of hot asphalt and damp weeds, and the road stretched ahead like a black ribbon unraveling into nothing. I tried calling a rideshare app, but my phone screen spun endlessly, a wheel of false hope. That's when I saw the Craigslist post. Safe, discreet ride available. Late hours welcome. Cash only. It felt risky, but the night around me felt riskier. The car arrived within 15 minutes, a dark sedan with tinted windows that reflected my own tired face back at me. The driver stepped out, tall and smiling, his voice warm with practiced charm. He offered to help with my bag, cracking small jokes that slipped easily into the humid night. I told myself I'd gotten lucky, that not everyone online was a predator, that sometimes strangers really did help. His laughter was low and pleasant, like a radio tuned to an old station. Inside, the car smelled faintly of cedar and citrus, a strangely calming mix. He asked about my destination, nodding as I gave the address, fingers already dancing over the GPS mounted on the dashboard. The first stretch of road was smooth, familiar. He told stories about other passengers he'd picked up. A nurse rushing home from a double shift, a musician stranded after a gig, a student who'd left their wallet behind. Each story was delivered with a soft chuckle, but the details were too sharp, like glass hidden in candy. As the miles slid by, the road signs stopped matching what I knew. He turned off onto a narrower highway without asking, explaining casually that it was a shortcut. The trees grew denser, their branches arching over the road like a tunnel of claws. My stomach tightened. I checked my phone for the map, but the signal bars had vanished, leaving only a blank expanse of digital gray. His stories shifted too. Now he talked about passengers who didn't know what they'd agreed to, how they thought they were going home but ended up somewhere better, delivered to their real lives. His voice was still gentle, but it had gained a strange resonance, like someone reciting from memory rather than speaking freely. I laughed weakly, hoping to puncture the tension, but he just smiled at the windshield. The headlights of another car appeared behind us, then another. At first I felt relief, other drivers on the road. But when I glanced again, the cars stayed perfectly spaced, their beams unwavering, like eyes tracking prey. A cold realization seeped in as the driver began humming a low, tuneless melody. I wasn't on a shortcut. I wasn't even on my route anymore. Held their distance with surgical precision, their headlights fixed on us like a pack of predators keeping formation. The driver's humming deepened, blending with the steady thrum of the tires on the asphalt until it felt like a single sound crawling under my skin. I stared at my phone again. No bars, no map, just a black mirror reflecting my wide eyes. My pulse beat in my ears like a drum. I needed to think, but the night pressed against the windows like heavy velvet, muffling every rational thought. He began speaking again, but now the warmth in his tone had cooled into something clinical. He told me about transfers, about new beginnings, his words floating out in a slow rhythm. Each story was more grotesque than the last. Passengers who vanished without complaint, people who had outgrown their old lives and were taken somewhere they'd never have to worry again. He said it like a gift, but his knuckles tightened on the wheel with each syllable. I watched his hands, pale and scarred, moving in subtle gestures like a conductor leading an invisible orchestra. I tried to ask where we were going, but my voice cracked. He didn't answer, just adjusted the rearview mirror so that our eyes met for a heartbeat. His irises looked strangely glassy, reflecting the headlights behind us. For a moment I thought I saw shapes moving inside them, like minnows under dark water. The car accelerated. The trees closed in thicker, their branches knotted like ribs around a spine. We passed no signs, no houses, not even a stray gas station light. The other cars crept closer, their beams fusing into a pale corridor of light. My breath fogged the window. I could smell something now, a faint sweet odor beneath the cedar and citrus, like iron and decaying leaves. I scanned the interior for anything that could be used as a weapon or a distraction. My fingers brushed an old receipt in the door pocket. On it, scrawled in block letters, was a single phrase: "Don't let them stop." My stomach flipped. Whose warning was this? The driver chuckled softly, a sound that didn't belong to any joke. "Almost there," he murmured, though I hadn't asked. His reflection in the window was slightly delayed, moving a fraction of a second behind him. In that glitch of movement, I saw his smile stretch wider than it should. The headlights behind us swelled until they filled the rear window, dazzling white. I shielded my eyes and saw in the glare silhouettes leaning forward in unison, faces indistinct but intent. It was choreographed, rehearsed, like a procession closing in. Somewhere up ahead, a glow rose beyond the trees, not the orange of a town, but a cold, bluish light, pulsing like a heartbeat. My body recognized it as danger even before my mind did. The driver's humming stopped. His hand reached for the dashboard, pressing a button I didn't recognize. All at once, the locks clicked shut, and then he turned to me, his voice a whisper that cut through the engine's roar. "You're not going home. You're being delivered." I'd been scrolling Craigslist for weeks, hunting for something to make my apartment feel less like a stopover and more like a home. When the listing appeared, antique oak dresser, immaculate condition, must pick up immediately, it looked like a small miracle. The photos showed a piece so intricate it seemed carved by memory itself. Dark wood veined with lighter streaks, brass handles shaped like curling vines. Even through the grainy images, it radiated a kind of solemn beauty. The seller's message was brief and urgent, offering a steep discount if I came that night. The man who sold it to me barely made eye contact. He moved stiffly, his breath shallow, as though carrying an invisible weight. We wrestled the dresser into my rented van without speaking much, the cold air smelling of wet leaves and motor oil. Before closing the van door, he pressed a folded piece of paper into my palm. "Polish it only with dry cloth," he muttered, "and don't leave it open at night." His eyes flicked to the dresser one last time, and then he shut his door and disappeared into the shadows. By the time I slid the dresser into my apartment, the city had gone to sleep. It dominated the room, taller, heavier than it had seemed outside, and its presence was immediate, like another person standing silently beside me. The carvings along the sides resembled creeping ivy, but under the lamplight they almost seemed to move, twisting subtly with each flicker of the bulb. I told myself it was just exhaustion playing tricks. The first night, I woke to a faint scratching sound, like a pen dragging across paper. Half asleep, I assumed it was the radiator. In the morning, though, I noticed fresh marks on the dresser's side panel. Thin, jagged scratches that hadn't been there before, etched at an angle like a crude tally. I ran my fingers over them, expecting roughness, but the wood was perfectly smooth, as if the marks were part of the original grain. By the third day, the scratches had changed positions. They weren't random anymore. They were beginning to form shapes, curves and slashes that looked like letters in a language just outside my comprehension. Each time I tried to photograph them, the images came out blurred, like the camera refused to see. That evening, as dusk seeped through the blinds, a drawer slid open with a soft sigh. No breeze, no vibration, just movement. My pulse jumped. Inside lay a bundle of old photographs tied with fraying twine. I hesitated before lifting them out, the stack cold against my skin. One by one, I flipped through the images. Dimly lit rooms, strangers' faces frozen mid-expression. Each photograph had the face slashed out with something sharp, leaving only bodies and settings behind. My throat tightened. At the bottom of the stack was a final photo. It was of me, standing in my own living room. Beneath the image, in neat black ink, was tomorrow's date. My breath caught in my throat, the photo trembling between my fingers. I turned in a frantic circle, scanning every corner of the room, half expecting someone to be standing there with a camera. But I was alone. The silence pressed in, heavy and absolute, broken only by the rhythmic thud of my heartbeat. The dresser loomed in the center of it all, its brass handles glinting faintly in the dim light. I stumbled backward, dropping the photo. It landed face up, that horrible image of me staring blankly into the lens, a perfect replica of the spot where I was now standing. My mind clawed for rational explanations. A prank, an old photo from a previous tenant, anything. But the timestamp was precise, tomorrow's date scrawled in ink so dark it looked wet. Whoever had taken this wasn't just watching me now. They were predicting me. Desperate, I grabbed my phone to call the seller, but the number rang dead, a hollow tone echoing like laughter in my ear. When I checked the Craigslist listing again, it was gone, erased as if it had never existed. The dresser's dark wood seemed to absorb the glow from my phone screen, its carvings writhing subtly, like ivy choking stone. Then came the scratching. Slow at first, almost playful, then faster, a fevered etching from within the drawers. The sound burrowed into my skull. I yanked open the top drawer, empty. The second, nothing. When I reached the third, the smell hit me, metallic and sour like old pennies and rot. Inside was a single object, a key, ancient and blackened with age. Its teeth were jagged, almost organic, like they'd grown that way. I didn't know what had opened, but when I touched it, the room seemed to exhale. The dresser's carvings shifted, the twisting vines now unmistakably forming letters. My breath fogged the air as I read them aloud, barely a whisper. "You belong here." The lights flickered, plunging the room into momentary darkness. When they returned, every drawer in the dresser was wide open, spilling their emptiness like gaping mouths. Photographs littered the floor, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, each one showing a different victim, each face violently slashed away. The air buzzed with a low, guttural hum, like the wood itself was vibrating with hunger. I bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. My phone slipped from my hands, the screen shattering as it hit the floor. Behind me, a final drawer slammed shut, the sound sharp and deliberate. Slowly it opened again, revealing a single new photograph. My hands shook as I lifted it. It wasn't of me standing anymore. It showed me lying on the ground, eyes wide and lifeless, the dresser looming above like a triumphant predator. And beneath the image, written in the same neat black ink, was no date at all. Just one word, etched so deep it always been my guilty addiction. A place where you could find anything, cheap furniture, odd jobs, last-minute rides. But lately, every ad I answered had spiraled into something darker, like a series of traps laid out just for me. A free couch that ended with a locked door and a stranger's sinister grin. A babysitting gig that turned into a psychological test I barely escaped. A room for rent, with rules that made no sense until I heard the muffled cries beneath the floorboards. Each time I survived by sheer luck, staggering home shaken and more paranoid than before. I wanted to believe it was random, a streak of terrible coincidences. But patterns have a way of clawing through denial. The usernames were always different, the wording slightly changed, yet something about the cadence was identical, like all the ads were being written by the same invisible hand. I started tracking them, creating a digital corkboard of screenshots and addresses. Over weeks, a sickening realization took shape. Every path led back to a single Craigslist account, one that never seemed to sleep. It was as if it had been watching me long before I noticed it. The breaking point came when I found a new post titled simply, "One Last Chance." The description was only 3 words, "Come find me." There was an address, one I didn't recognize, on the edge of an industrial district where warehouses went to die. It felt like bait, but by then I was done hiding. My life had become a series of half-lived days, always looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next nightmare to find me. I needed answers, even if it meant walking straight into the jaws of whatever had been hunting me. The building was a hollow shell of concrete and broken windows. The night smelled of rust and stagnant water, and my footsteps echoed like accusations as I stepped inside. A single light flickered at the far end of the room, casting long, trembling shadows. My breath came in shallow pulls as I approached, my fists clenched, rehearsing demands I wasn't sure I had the courage to speak, and then I saw them. At a folding table sat someone hunched over a laptop, their back to me. Their posture was eerily familiar, the tilt of their head, the way their fingers danced over the keys. My chest tightened. As they turned, my world fractured. It was me, not a look-alike, not a sibling I never knew. It was my exact face, my exact expression, staring back at me with a smile that was just a shade too wide. My knees nearly buckled. The other me closed the laptop slowly, savoring my horror. "I've been writing your story," they whispered, their voice a perfect mirror of mine. Behind them, a massive screen flickered to life on the wall. A new Craigslist ad appeared in bold black letters. "Free souls available. First come, first served," and beneath it, in chilling red text, was a single name listed as the first offering, mine. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Seeing my own name on that screen was like glimpsing an obituary written in advance. The glow of the monitor painted my double's face in icy light, making our features indistinguishable except for one thing: their eyes. Mine were wide with terror. Theirs were calm, knowing, as if they'd rehearsed this meeting for years. The warehouse around us faded into a blur, the air thick with dust and the faint smell of overheated wires, while my pulse hammered like a trapped bird. I wanted to demand answers, but my throat locked. My double didn't seem surprised by my silence. They leaned back in the folding chair, fingers steepled, and tilted their head in a gesture that felt stolen from my own habits. "You've been so eager," they said softly, voice carrying in the cavernous space. Clicking, calling, showing up. Every ad, every bargain, you walked into each one like a volunteer. Their words weren't accusations. They were a diagnosis. The screen flickered behind them, cycling through snapshots of my life, grainy images of me at each Craigslist encounter. The free couch, the locked basement, the vintage camera. Each photo was time-stamped, but not from the past, from moments only seconds after I'd arrived. It was as though someone had been recording me from just outside the frame. The final image showed me entering this warehouse, my face determined, unaware of the camera. A new timestamp appeared. Now. I forced myself to step closer. "Who are you?" I croaked, but the sound came out like a stranger's voice. My double smiled, that too wide smile, and for the first time I noticed their hands. The fingertips were stained dark, not with ink, but something thicker, glistening under the flicker of the monitor. "I'm the author," they murmured. "I write the hunger and the hope. Craigslist is just a doorway. You were the story all along." A low hum built in the walls like a generator awakening. Around the edges of the warehouse, figures emerged from the shadows, silhouettes of people with blurred faces, each one holding a phone glowing faintly with the Craigslist logo. Their movements were synchronized, as if following invisible cues. The screen behind my double changed again, now displaying an ad titled "Replacement Available." Beneath it was a blurred photo of me standing in this exact spot. My expression blank, already taken. I stumbled backward, but the exit behind me had sealed with a heavy clang I hadn't heard. My double stood, the chair screeching across the floor. "Every soul thinks they're the buyer," they said, stepping closer, until they realized they've already been sold. The crowd of faceless users closed in, their phone screens casting pale blue halos over their empty eyes. My double raised a hand and the screen shifted one last time, displaying a new ad with a fresh name at the top. It was still mine, but beneath it was a single word, pulsing red like a heartbeat: "Collected, subscribe, if you dare."